This is the NBR Review Committee. Today is the 24th of May, 2017, and my name is Jo Margaret Mano. So we have a great deal to do today, and some important stuff. Sadly, Brad Barkley can't be with us because he's at his daughter's graduation, but he's given me his comments on the stuff that we're going to be talking about, so when we get to that, if the committee doesn't mind, I'll read his comments. Okay, so let's start with public comment. Does the public have any comments?
It looks like the public is hiding behind a clipboard.
The public will spare you.
Not tonight.
Okay, thank you, public, for being here and for not having much to say, because that means we can have more time to do things. Okay, so I'll retrieve the agenda I gave to the person who's not here. First, we're going to need to approve the 5/10/17 minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes, unless anyone has any edits.
I'll second it.
Okay. If anyone would like to help me by taking minutes, that would be most appreciated, because running the meeting and taking minutes is a little stressful. Okay, so I'd like to continue the discussions we started at our last meeting. We talked very generally about the things that were brought up during the public comment meeting.
We have to vote to approve the minutes.
Oh, we have to vote to approve the minutes, okay? Which were moved by Dennis Young and seconded by Don Carr. Motion to approve the minutes.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Approved. So last time we were discussing the various things that were brought up in the public workshop and put together in a very comprehensive package by our consultant, Michael Allen. And so we talked pretty generally about things last time. And we also noted that the things that we wanted to deal with were mostly on pages 11 and 12 of the visual preference survey. So if you have that with you, that would be good. I think today what we should do is focus on coming to some agreement with regards to some of the major premises. And the first one will probably be height. And as I noted in the minutes, there was a very strong majority at the public workshop that 3 stories should be the height limit. That was the recommendation back in the 2007 Behan study. So I'd like to see if we can come to some kind of agreement on that. The Behan study, by the way, recommended 3 stories, but also 40 feet limit to allow for peaked roofs. So I'd like to see if people are wanting to talk about that. I just note previous to 2013, to the 2013 July rezoning, the B3 district existed until July 2013, and that B3 zoning district had a height limit of 25 feet, okay? That zoning that changed the B3 district was called the North Chestnut Gateway Zone, and that was passed in July 2013, and that raised the height limit to 45 feet. The height limit was again raised in 2015 in the October rezoning that changed the North Chestnut Gateway to the Nbr Zone. So that's a little bit of the history. There's been various fragments of history circulating, but that's the whole history, which actually you had in your hands from documents that I gave you before, but it's right there.
If I can add also the discussion among the village board that resulted in this committee being created. I think there was a majority of the 4 of the board members spoke in favor of a lower height limit. And as that's one of the reasons we're here, is just to add to what you're saying.
Right. So, I'd like to suggest that we move that the height limit should be, would you like to have some discussion?
Yes.
Okay, have some discussion.
I think last meeting I mentioned what are the reasons, if there was a possible build-out exercise that could be done to show us what the capacity would be in the zone, in the district, if we went from 4 stories to 3 stories, and what impact that would have on the surrounding community if we dropped from 4 stories to 3 stories.
Well, we've never, up until now, there's been nothing built with 4 stories.
That's
There
right.
was no build-out analysis done
Right.
with the last rezoning.
Mhm.
So, I mean, thinking about build-out in terms of the capacity is dealing with a lot of speculation if you've
Sure.
got to include both 3 and 4-story scenarios.
Yeah, I know we've looked at communities that have 3 stories, that's the preferred look, is a, 1 floor you've got retail,
Okay.
another 2 stories you've got residential. A lot of those communities have sprawl surrounding them, and if there was another story in those towns, in those districts that are limited to, perhaps that would limit some of the sprawl that happens in the surrounding community.
Okay, but let me just say that I've done a tremendous amount of study on height limits, and in terms of villages, the vast number of villages in southern New York State, particularly in our surrounding communities, are 35 feet,
Right.
okay? The places that have higher limits are cities, and typically they have those in places where they're reusing industrial buildings and repurposing them for apartments.
Yeah.
For example, in Kingston, they're doing that, and also in Poughkeepsie
Sure.
and Newburgh as well.
Mhm.
So, what you're suggesting is a speculative kind of
That's right.
situation.
Mhm.
And I think it would take an immense amount of time and also a lot of unknowns.
Mhm.
There would be a lot of unknown things that you were trying to deal with.
Are you concerned about continued sprawl?
I'm only imagining that the reason why it went up to the height that it was, with three stories above retail, is possibly to increase the density of people living in that
Right.
district. And maybe, I'm not certain about this, maybe that would help reduce the amount of other types of housing being built in our area, in the town of New Paltz, perhaps also
But
within the
I
village.
don't see how that would.
Because the people who are living in the village are looking for apartments. The sprawl entity is single-family homes that are in a more diverse pattern, a less dense pattern.
Possibly, but.
So you can't really equate apples and oranges there. I do understand about the sprawl issue,
Mhm.
but in terms of a capacity issue, we have to also think about infrastructure capacity and traffic and
Right.
parking,
Mhm.
all of which
Time frame for that.
well, the last zoning ordinance lasted for 2 years. So, zoning ordinances come and go as the need changes, and predicting the future is very complicated.
Right.
So,
As I understand things, you make a zone and it remains the zone until you
change it.
change it and make another.
Yeah, so you
There's no
don't,
time
you
limit.
don't say,
So I don't think we
it's
have a
gonna
time
be
limit.
like this
So-
for 10
period.
years.
So potentially, we're just looking to do this, make these recommendations for a period of a couple of years. Is this?
Could be.
Yeah.
We're hoping to get it right so nobody needs to change it in a couple of years. That's the
Yeah.
goal.
Because it's been more than a couple of years in review.
No, it hasn't.
Well, if you count the 2 moratoriums plus this one, we're up to 18 months of moratorium.
But the moratoriums were for different things.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be
I'm
nice
just
to
trying to
get.
explore all the
Absolutely.
purposes here.
And one of the other things we're gonna talk about is our recommendation to divide this into 2 zones has
Right.
been understood and interpreted by our consultant, who's come forward with a very good way of dividing it into 2 zones. And so that we may have different numbers of stories in those 2 zones. Yeah.
About sprawl. I think that the philosophy and concept about increased density is often linked to the notion that it prevents or reduces sprawl. And in theory, that's a really good theory, but it also means that your community has to address its land use patterns in the areas where sprawl
That's right.
would happen. And so it's a much more complex, I mean, people always say, oh, we'll make density to prevent sprawl.
Could you come and talk into a microphone?
I don't have that much more to say, but I will. And having served on the Open Space Commission for way too many years, I'll just say we've really looked and thought about sprawl in New Paltz, and it really does revolve around what you do in the open spaces where sprawl can occur. So we've worked pretty hard in New Paltz to put protections in places where people really revere the landscape. And we've looked at the potential build out in the areas that are open, so we have a sense of where our most vulnerable lands are. So it's really a 2-part process.
I would imagine more than that.
More than that, but at least a 2-part process in terms of thinking about sprawl. So I just wanted to inject that.
Sure.
I kind of see this whole effort as within the district, we're looking to have sprawl. We're looking to build it out. We're just looking to manage the type of sprawl that we have. Right now, it's a kind of ugly part of town, and we're looking to reimagine something else. And what we do here sets the rules for the sprawl within that zone.
That's a good
You
point.
know, a healthy sprawl,
Yeah.
healthy sprawl.
Or
Healthy direct.
an unsprawl, because it's a very concentrated district, so we are mitigating against sprawl by building to a greater height than we have right now.
Right.
And what we're really trying to do is seek a Goldilocks solution, so, you know, we build to the right height and not too high and not too low. So,
So I didn't mean that as a correction, I just wanted
No,
to
no,
add it to the
I
discussion.
think it's something that needs to be discussed. It's not necessarily the point of view that I have. It's just, I don't, you know, these are questions people have, that
Right.
you're only going to force 3 stories. Well, what about the demand on housing? How does that answer the demand on housing in the village? How does it, by going to 3 stories? It doesn't.
That raises a lot of other
That's
questions
right.
about housing in the village.
Right,
Yeah.
and the demands that a 4th story would place on the district,
Right.
as far as the amount of traffic that an extra story on all of these buildings is gonna bring. I can tell you, I rode my bike with my family down Henry W. Du Bois to get ice cream over the weekend. It took 5 minutes to cross the street, you know, and that was going down the street to the crosswalk, because nobody was stopping. And I'm thinking about the NBR district and all the buildings that could potentially be there, and I said, wow, we need a lot of crosswalks or a street light or something, because people aren't gonna be able to cross the street.
I mean,
And if we're adding an extra 25% of people into every one of those buildings, that's a lot that we're adding into the community.
and at the moment, those buildings are 1 story. So we're, by giving this area 3 stories, we're actually increasing the amount of potential housing by a significant amount. So it's like not going overboard and, you know, having the straw that breaks the camel's back, because we got to deal with traffic and parking and congestion and stress on the infrastructure.
Sure.
So, those are my thoughts.
Water,
And-
sewer.
Do you want to add some thoughts? And then
Just
I'll-
water, sewer. I was curious if Brad had any thoughts on this in his notes.
Well, I asked him just to talk about 3 things that we were dealing with today, and one of those was building height limits. But as you know, in our discussions, we've raised a lot of concerns about infrastructure in terms of capacity of the sewage treatment plant and the amount of water that we have, particularly if we have shutdowns of the reservoir, and, you know, how much extra population will put increased demands on those systems. And without a lot of time to study and predict all the numbers, which will take us a lot of time, and we don't have anyone who'll do it.
It
So,
probably wouldn't be very accurate because it would be a lot
no,
of guessing.
it's too much speculation. But certainly, we're not in a situation where we've got a great deal of spare capacity that could handle a vast increase in population. So, if you don't mind, I'll just read Brad's thoughts, and then other people can weigh in. Building height limits, Brad Barkley's concerns. The visual preference survey at the NBR public meeting resulted in a clear recommendation to cap the height of structures at 3 stories. The main reasons given for this preference were as follows. A, community character. Building of more than 3 stories was seen to be out of keeping with the community character of the entire village. This type of development was deemed more consistent with the cities in the Mid-Hudson region, Poughkeepsie, Kingston, Newburgh, not with other desirable villages. B, there was a concern expressed that buildings of more than 3 stories require larger lots than are at present in the NBR to accommodate required parking and other amenities. C, the visual impact on the district and the surrounding areas would be far too great with more than 3-story buildings. These visual impacts would include the loss of existing views of the gunks. Also, the creation of a canyon-like feel to the area where the buildings are not significantly set back from the roadway, which would lead them towering over the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail and the surrounding residential areas. So, other thoughts?
I have a quick question. I mentioned the 40-foot limit that BN recommended years ago to accommodate a
Peaked roof line.
peak roof line. So is the we have a current limit of 50. When you say a number 50, 40, does that mean the peak of the roof? Does that always mean, is there other ways to interpret that, or is that
No, that means the peak of the
peak
roof.
of the roof?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to look at Bill because he's got more code experience. Is that the peak of the roof? If the elevator shaft on top, that's not included in that.
That's
In
not,
that, right? So it doesn't include just the peak of the roof. There are other
Yeah,
exceptions
you've
that
got
can go higher than
accessory
that.
structures.
like the solar panels.
Yeah. Or ice cream signs.
Cones.
Yeah. What?
Oh, I know what that is.
That's where I waited for 5 minutes
So
to
I
cross
don't know
check you.
if anybody has anything they still want to say on this topic, but I'd like to make a motion that we make a recommendation that we limit, oops.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to the discussion about the increased density of the 4th story. In some Chicago suburbs, there were zoning changes to accommodate greater density, exactly, I think, elevate, I think, as a potential prevention of
Sure.
sprawl. And what ended up happening is they got both density and sprawl.
Sure.
And the highways themselves could not accommodate greater growth. And what you have now is traffic wait times that are equivalent to the inner city of Chicago. It was quite a startling thing to know that a 20-minute trip, I used to live there, so what was once a 20-minute trip, takes 45 minutes now. It's more than double in a
What,
very short period of time.
what town was that?
This is Glenview, Niles, Morton Grove, Des Plaines, that whole route going.
That's been booming for many years. That's been booming for many years, that whole
Yeah,
corridor there.
but they had elevated the height restriction in their zoning, they changed it, and they
And
have,
it just didn't work.
well, they got sprawl as well,
Yeah.
so.
So I'd like to make a motion to make a recommendation to the village board that the zone contain buildings with a height limit of 3 stories. And I do like the pitched roof. I do like the increasing the height to 40 feet for that purpose. So that's just a motion. I don't know if anyone...
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is that in favor?
I'm nodding my head, yes,
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to number 2. The next thing I wanted to talk about was parking. And parking is a very complicated subject. But certainly the current parking guidelines in the NBR are way too low. They are 0.5 of a parking space, and I don't know anyone who drives half a car. But it's proved to be really difficult in looking at zero place, and it's obviously not sufficient for our community because we have a lot of students in the community, and very often they have many more cars than you would think they have. So if you look at the community as a whole, we really have a situation of, I think what the mayor has described as driveway creep. And that means that particularly in the older parts of the village where there are student housing units, there are houses that are occupied by students, often the driveways are filled to capacity. And so that's an indication of how many extra cars one really needs to deal with. The standard in many places are at least one parking space per unit or per bedroom. In fact, some places are quite a bit more than that. I looked up the Lloyd standards, and they are 1.5 spaces per unit, and for any extra bedrooms, there's another additional amount. So if we recommend something like one parking space per bedroom, that seems to be a good yardstick to work with, something like that.
It seems low to me,
Yeah.
especially we're gonna have retail too. That takes care of it, so you have.
Well, the retail has another,
Requirement.
that's another additional parking.
I think it has to be a minimum of one space per one bedroom.
Yeah, and then if you have an additional bedroom,
Yeah, I'd go with one, but, you know, I think it's low.
I'm saying minimum, you know.
It's not just students, it's even families too.
Sure.
Students, kids get to the point where they're driving age, and then all of a sudden there's 3, 4, 5 cars in a driveway, and
Even if two people
My wife
without
works in
children,
Kingston,
they're
and
both
can you
living,
two
you know,
have
they're
cars?
both working, they probably have 2 cars.
before my wife was able to walk to work, we had 2 cars. We're fortunate we can get away with one now.
Yeah.
But even that's a challenge sometimes.
And I just want to make the comment that they talk about, you know, the fact that it can be lower for senior citizen housing. As a senior citizen, I do qualify as I really resent that. I drive more now than when I was working. And I know lots of people that, you know, I mean, it doesn't work. All you have to do is go to Woodland Pond and look at all the cars. And I have friends that are living there, and some have given up their cars. Parking spaces are hard to find.
Oh, yeah, if you go there during the day, you can't.
You cannot.
It's hard for an official parking spot.
You know, to make the assumption that seniors do not drive is absurd.
yeah, well, I think in senior citizen housing, they're talking about places maybe with smaller apartments
Even so.
than Woodland Pond, but yeah. Well, I was thinking of one parking space per bedroom as being, the kind of,
So that would, if you go a 2-bedroom apartment, you get 2 cars. You get a 1-bedroom apartment, you get 1 parking spot. Is that correct? So by having that, let's discuss this.
right.
Every bedroom gets a car. What does that do to our traffic load?
Well, it's gonna happen anyway, our traffic load. Now, the way that one can deal with this, I was trying to find, somewhere in this big heap of papers, I have something about Lloyd's new parking regulations that they just passed in the last few years. And there are ways out of this situation in that if you don't have enough parking available on your site, you can pay into a fund that then buys space in the municipality for a municipal lot. But that lot then belongs to the municipality. It's like a recreational fee. So some communities, I think we do too, have a situation where if you can't provide on-site recreational area, then you can pay into a recreational fee, and that fee is then available for the community to provide playgrounds or recreational areas in other places. So it's like off-site recreation, and you can provide for off-site parking. Or if there's already a municipal lot that is within a certain distance from your property, then there may be something that can be worked out with that. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I would think that one parking space per bedroom could be something we could work with a lot better than half.
I
Yes.
have a question. I know that the formula that was used for the original Nbr was taken from a more urban community where there
Yeah.
would be light rail or bus service or whatever. And I understand the desire to get people out of their cars, but I do think that even one parking space per bedroom, I'm not sure that seems workable either, because many bedrooms accommodate 2 people, and in a community where there's a lot of student housing, you can assume that every bedroom that's rented by students is going to accommodate as many as they can. So I just am concerned that one per bedroom still seems maybe unmanageable.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to.
And I'm not on the committee, but I'm just sharing my concern.
I don't want to offend any zoning geeks, but I think the well-intentioned desire to control human behavior by zoning, by saying, for example, 0.5 cars per bedroom, it runs into conflict with the real world. And you end up having an ideal notion that you zone for, but when you build the building, reality sets in and human behavior may not have changed, and people may not have cared what the zoning was. I'm getting this apartment and bringing my 2 cars, so I'm also, I'd be more toward 1.5, but I could be bargained down. I do think that, 0.5 is not sufficient to,
Okay.
1 makes me nervous.
One would be my absolute minimum personally, because all the reasons have already been said. It's we're not going to control behavior by having less cars. I can think back to when I was a student and I knew people that lived in New Paltz Commons, and there were 2 of them, and they had 2 cars and they had 1 parking spot, and they were constantly trying to find somewhere on the street to park a car. They had to rent from, it was My Hero at the time, but they had to rent a parking spot in the winter for when it snowed, so they had a place to put their car. I've heard people discussing Zero Place and saying, oh, well, they can just park at the pool if there isn't enough parking. And it's like, no, people aren't going to give away their cars because there aren't enough parking spots in a building. They're going to like an apartment, they're going to get it, and then they're going to realize that they're stuck. And then the cars are going to end up on the street. They're going to end up in all the neighboring parking lots. It's a problem in the rest of our community. I don't see why we should make it a problem in this part too.
Okay.
One other consideration I just want to point is that, especially on the smaller lots, then you're talking about more parking space, that's more asphalt, that's more, paving. That could be an issue as far as, the logistics of those sites.
I think most developers are going to look at how much they can develop, and it's going to be building and parking. They're not going to say, oh, well, there's less parking, so we'll make more greenery around. The building's going to get bigger, and they're going to have more apartments, or they'll have larger apartments that they can charge more money for. I'm not sure that
Well,
logic really works.
I'm hoping that we discussed previously the possibility of using, because as we transition to those bigger lots, although are we discussing that later? And I'm sorry I have to leave soon, but
No, we are discussing that later.
the northern lots are bigger and the southern lots are smaller.
Yeah.
So at least I floated the idea of using a percentage, start using percentages to conceive of how big you want the building to be and how far you want it set back from the rail trail and the street. Whereas I think we were pushing towards having the buildings be towards the street and away from the rail trail as much as possible, which might imply that we could save some green space and, build that into the code perhaps to avoid people just building out on those lots. I don't think any of us want that. So, and I have to get going, but I personally would go with 1 parking spot per bedroom. Partially, I think in my mind, just for limiting the number of parking spaces that you have on a lot in general, but Yeah, I'm not looking to affect human behavior either. I think you're absolutely right. That's certainly not gonna affect human behavior. But one doesn't seem unreasonable to me.
Okay.
Could you live with 1.25?
I think I really need to do a bit more research on this and come back
Sure.
next time. Before you leave though, I'm hoping that maybe we can squeeze in an extra meeting, next Wednesday, if anybody's available then.
I will be here. If we
I
have
know
enough.
Don's out of town.
Next city, yeah.
Next,
Probably, yeah.
you're gonna be out of town or not?
No, I can probably make that.
Okay, that would be great.
And I can't be here.
Okay, because there's a lot of things we need to make decisions about fairly soon before we move on to our next step. So, we've got too much to handle today even. So that way we could at least get back into it next week.
I can make it.
Okay, and I know that because it's the 31st, thank you for
Just
coming.
let us know when you make your decision. by
Okay,
email.
it'll be the same time next week.
Yeah.
So, let me do some more research on different parking formulas, and, I lean to your idea too of 1.5, but I wanna do some more research on that. Okay? So I'll postpone reading it, Brad's thing. The next thing I really wanna talk about is the, division of these two different areas. And I guess really I've been talking about the southern area, which is, I think we talked about this before, right? That really we're dealing with two very different areas. The area closer to the village core, which is basically the area from Stewart's into the village, is what I consider the southern section.
Tributary 13 is
Tributary
kind of the
13.
limit.
Tributary 13 is not only a natural boundary, but also the lots north of Tributary 13 don't necessarily have central water and sewer. So that's another issue that kind of divides these two areas into what we're talking about. And really, I should have started out by saying that, because in terms of story height, I was dealing more with the southern portion, which is more like close to the village core. As we go further north, we get into a different scenario. We have larger lots, but even though we have larger lots, we also have other issues that come into effect, e.g. faster traffic, and also the fact that if we have 3 stories in this piece of the zone, we may impede people's visual vistas and view sheds towards the mountains. So that was something that,
Right.
that people brought up before.
Can we refer now, if we're, just for the sake of discussion, that north of tributary 13 we're calling NBR North
Yep,
and NBR South is South, just so that we're
Okay.
clear.
That's good.
that's good. Okay. So, in terms of NBR North and NBR South, the stuff I was really talking about with the 3 stories was referring to NBR South, where we want to focus more of the density that we can see, sort of making it more of a village-like feel. And so when it comes to setbacks, we're again going to be talking about NBR North and NBR South. And the differences there are that in the southern area, where we've got a denser situation, and hopefully we could have a complete streets approach with bike lanes and landscape strips and, you know, a situation where you've got a wide sidewalk. There we can have much less in the way of setbacks so that you've got a good streetscape. Is that something that the people are fairly comfortable with? A smaller
The building's
setback.
closer to the road now.
Yeah, the buildings are closer to the road, and then you can have parking on the side or in the rear. Again, the idea of having a greater buffer on the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail side than on Route 32 is something that came up before. And
Well, I think also that's part of the discussion was having them set back in a bigger lot kind of makes them a little bit distant and
Right. So that's part of NBR North, which we don't have the freedom of doing that in NBR South, because in NBR South, we've got smaller lots and a more dense situation. Are people aware of where Stewart's is? Okay. All right, so, yeah, the recommendation, I mean, we don't necessarily have to come up with numbers here. In terms of what Brad suggested, his thing was setbacks. Most seem to agree that the NBR should be a mixed-use district with extensive complete street amenities, sidewalks, bike lanes, on-street parking, landscaping, and trees. This type of street treatment would usually call for retail with storefronts on the first floor with a 0-foot front setback. This creates a safe, comfortable setting for pedestrians and bicycles, which encourages people to get out of their cars. It also encourages window shopping, providing those walking along the corridor something to engage them while walking. A, the 0-foot front setback also leaves more room to the rear of the properties to allow for a proper setback to buffer the rail trail and adjacent residential districts from the parking, deliveries, dumpsters, generators, and less pleasant aspects of new development. The public meeting clearly indicated that people were not only interested in the impact of future development on Route 32, but even more so of the impact on these resources. In the southern portion of the zone, the lots are much smaller, and the parcels on the west side of Route 32 back up not only to the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail, but also the National Historic District. The 0-foot street setback here provides space for additional buffering of this area on the Wallkill Valley Railroad side. If there is a decision that the streetscape provisions are not as important in the northern end of the NBR zone, where parcels are larger, then a more campus type of setbacks can be considered for this area. Here the sidewalks or bike lanes would still be present, but because of higher traveling speeds, on-street parking would not be allowed. A landscape buffer would be required along the road and the rail trail, with more or less equal setbacks required from Route 32 and the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail, placing the buildings more centered between the two.
So we're saying on-street parking for the NBR South?
I think, yeah, that's a possibility.
I mean, is that what, that sounded like that's what he was saying?
Yeah, but we don't all have to agree with that. But in terms of the complete streets approach, one way you can do that is to have the parking so that it buffers the bike lane, so that you have parked cars, bike lane, sidewalk. So that means that your bike lane is actually more protected.
Right.
And that's something that national standards are now recommending, so that there's less impact of car door opening on bicyclists when you have a parked car that's right next to the sidewalk and the bike lane is outside of the parked car. So again, that's something that that we can further discuss. But the setback issue, how do people feel about that? In other words, smaller setbacks in NBR South and bigger ones in NBR North, and bigger ones on the rail trail side than on the Route 32 side.
That sounds like it makes sense. How would they be defined? I mean, is that up to us or?
We're gonna keep talking.
I would thank you to our volunteer firefighters. in
Thank
town.
you, volunteer firefighters. That's why we have that siren. Sadly, it reminds me of World War II, but that's another story. So, to continue our discussion, we can deal with that in terms of feet, and then the planning board could have discretion as to decide what footage was necessary in a particular circumstance.
Do you think feet or a percentage? I'm not
I just
strongly in
think,
favor of either. I'm just.
I think feet is far easier to understand. So, I mean, typically, if you're looking at zoning ordinances, it has those standards
Yeah,
defined
I
in
guess you want
terms
to make
of
it as
feet.
simple as possible.
And it would be
Yeah.
consistent amongst all properties if it's the
Okay.
same feet,
Yeah,
you
it-
get
it-
that nice Main
I get it.
Street type of feel.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I think footage is an easier, way to look at it. I mean, if you look at our current,
So you would prefer to have larger setbacks in NBR North instead of, or in NBR South?
no, NBR North has larger setbacks, NBR South has smaller setbacks. I'm sorry. go
Rather
ahead.
than keeping it consistent?
Yeah, because the lots in the NBR North really turns into a different kind of zone because it's transitioning into the town in a more suburban kind of milieu. Although we've got BOCES at the very top there, and
Right, and that's what it is now. Once
Right.
it starts getting built out, it's gonna have a different feel. And just for me personally, I think there's an added appeal in having it consistent throughout the entire district, as long as it makes sense. So,
okay,
as far as the logic, because when I look at this and I look at the rail trail and I think about the, not just the footprint, but the shadow that we're making, I really like the idea of everything being closer to the street. And especially if there's going to be on-street parking, if you have on-street parking and then buildings are set back more, what is that parking for? It's not really as convenient to park on the street when the building's 20 feet off the street.
mhm.
So I'm just trying to gather what is the advantage of having a larger setback in the NBR North.
Well, just because you're not having the same kind of tight streetscape necessarily with retail on the bottom, right? Although we're trying to do that.
Right.
So, one of the things we might want to think about, which has been suggested by the consultant, is that we want to sort of revisit whether NBR North would be exactly like NBR South. Because really, they're two different animals.
Oh, absolutely. But,
Okay.
But, while they're different animals as far as the size of the property and some of the infrastructure access that it has, when someone's driving down 32, they're not going to really feel that so much once everything starts to get built up. They're just going to see a streetscape. So that's why I'm just kind of thinking, personally, I like the idea of everything being consistent, but I'm very open to your wise expert opinion.
Well, I'm open to opinions too. I mean, it's not nearly so cut and dried as some of the other things that we're dealing with.
One thing I would point out is that in NBR North, several of the places, the buildings are homes, they're residential homes. And we've heard from several of those people at the public hearing talking about how they really want to be able to keep their viewscape of the mountains. So if they're on the east side and they've got buildings that are up close against the road, they're going to lose some of that. I'm not sure. I'm just.
That's a very important to take that into consideration. That's kind of like what I was looking for when I asked the question. Did
Right.
you have
Well, I was
other
gonna
feedback?
say that, I think that there's a lot of appeal to visual variation, and it would be great if elements are of the property. So in the NBR North, a lot of those properties in the back are in the floodplain or are wet and really can't be very well developed. So that might dictate pushing it closer to the street. But there might be places where, for the purposes of visual variation, and as you're coming into a denser area, you don't want it to be kind of like
The
Out of
canyon.
nowhere, right?
kind of Russian block buildings. You want there to be some variation as you come in. It's like, I can't think of any other way to describe it, but I think what we're trying to get away from is this notion of like a canyon or a solid block of buildings. And I'm thinking of places in Rhinebeck where some of the new development is set back a little bit from the street, and there is room for 6 cars to park in front of the building. And it just creates that visual variation, which is sometimes a good thing.
Okay, well, as we're dwindling, I don't want to make any decisions right now about that, but I do want to talk about something else. So let's revisit setbacks, and we'll do some more research on that, and perhaps get some pictures of different places, or in your travels, look at those, and I'll go take some pictures of Rhinebeck, so that we've got that to use as a balancing thing. This is a kind of nuanced discussion, more so than some of the other things, which I think we can get the hard and fast numbers on.
Can we take guidance from the results of the public session on setbacks?
Yes, we can, but that wasn't, we'll look at that again. What I'd like to do now, though, is move on to look at the footprint, because I have some suggestions about that, and I'm beginning to feel that we need to take some more time to look at some of these other issues before we decide them. So I just want to take you through, we're up to number 5 now. Discussion of the NBR footprint change. So this was the footprint in the B3 zone, which was the zone that we had, sorry,
It's okay.
the zone that we were dealing with in this area from 1976, I think, until 2013. And it was called the B3 district, and it's in that kind of like intense dotty stuff. Can you see highway business district there? And this is kind of an old piece of document.
Artwork.
Yes, but you'll notice if you look at your aerial photograph that the zone only went sort of just slightly past Barbecue Drive, which was truncated then. Have we lost our other picture? We had more pictures here. No. All right, I guess that, thank you, Dennis.
Oh, I thought that.
Yeah, okay. So Barbecue Drive has now been extended and it ends up in Cooper Street. So on the picture here, you can see where the apartment buildings are. And then this is Barbecue, north of that. If you see where the two roads break into a Y, the top or the northern end of the B3 zone was there, sort of in that half Y. So the whole top area of NBR North was not in the same zone. That was in a residential zone, an R2 resident district, which I think is 6 units to the acre.
And is that the area where some people who have residences found themselves in this zone
Yes.
without
So now
knowing?
if you look at your aerial photograph, and on the east side, that's where the zone was extended. And we'll come back to that. But this is the background. This is what it was until July 2013. And then in July 2013, that whole zone, the B3 zone, became North Chestnut Gateway, but it did not include that northern bit. Then the most recent change, which happened in 2015, started out with this footprint. So while the changes were being made in 2015, while they were still under discussion, this was the proposed footprint for the NBR zone, and it was extended north to the village line, but it was not extended east to Route 32. That road is the road that you take if you go into BOCES and then you're heading towards Huguenot Street. I'm not sure if it has an actual name, but the original proposal on the 16th of September in front of the planning board, and in front of the planning board was this footprint. But then between that time and the time that this was actually enacted, the footprint grew. So this was the footprint that was finally approved by the village board in the passage of the most recent zoning enactment. So this became the NBR zone, and this was what included that extra piece on the east side that included BOCES parking lot, 3 houses on the west side of Route 32, and the front yards of all the things to the village line on the east side of Route 32.
Was there ever a rationale?
There was no rationale, and the people that we've heard from who lived on the east side were never informed.
It probably has to go by lot size, I'm gathering. If you look at the list here, it's all these lots.
Right.
So that's probably how they did it and how those parcels ended up in it, but I think it looks a lot more organic and reasonable, when it's all on that side of 32.
Yeah.
This creates real problems because these lots are half in the town and half in the village. So people have to pay taxes under both umbrellas. I mean, all village residents pay town taxes too. But this creates a tremendous problem. And one thing I would like our committee to think about is maybe rationalizing this and going back to the original proposed footprint for the NBR, and maybe being able to return those to the R2 district? Yeah. Which is the adjoining district. The adjoining districts are residential, and BOCES is a pre-existing grandfathered use, and probably an entity that's going to stay there.
And the people that lived in those 3 houses by BOCES were unaware of any of this.
Yeah.
I know that people on the other side were unaware, but I spoke to those people.
I think there's a lot of arguments for putting it back the way it was up at that end. Question, was Salvation Army always included in
Yeah,
in B3? Okay.
yeah.
I heard somewhere, where that hadn't been. Okay. I do have a little bit of concern with what could be done at that location, being that it's so close and overlooks more than almost anything else, the historic district in Huguenot Street.
It's
So
also
just-
it's the narrows.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just, throwing out there, I might want to actually remove that parcel.
Joe, I thought that the NBR zone, or the zone first ended at Mulberry Street and it got extended to Broadway. I must.
Well, I guess you say the same thing about the Village Pizza Lot. It's right there on the rail trail. I mean, it's
Right.
not far at all. So, you know, I have a special concern over those couple of properties.
And that pizza parking lot had, you know, it used to have a rundown, dilapidated garage, but now there's, you know, several, you know, it's a mixed-use building, and it is literally right up against the rail trail.
Dennis and I met years ago. We both worked at Village Pizza, so we're familiar with the property.
Yes, that's chiseling away at the Nbr zone is another issue that may bring many more complicated issues into our bailiwick.
That's why we get the big bucks.
Very funny. So at least, yeah.
Perhaps we can consider some sort of verbiage in the code that says if you're within 50 feet of a historic building, you have different restrictions.
Well, actually, I think there
There
already are current,
Okay.
under seeker there are regulations if you're more than
Right.
500 feet from a building, but they may not be stringent enough.
right,
And you know,
That's assuming a full secret.
yeah. I mean, that's a seeker thing rather than a zoning regulation, but it is really concerning. How we can put special restrictions in is something we really need to examine.
Well, I just want to put those parcels on the table for discussion. Not, you know, we're not going to decide today, but I want to
Yeah.
make sure that gets in the mix.
And of course, they're the ones that come right up against the.
The rail trail too.
Well,
Well,
that's,
not
yeah,
that, I'm not saying that, the houses.
yeah.
on-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right behind those parcels is Day Hall.
I wanted to add to that, there's a need for restrictions on commercial access to the rail trail along that entire corridor.
Right.
Something that hasn't been addressed in the past. I know the New Paltz Chamber of Commerce many years ago, back in the 90s, had opposed the acquisition of the rail trail. And they actually did editorials in the paper, and there was a dissension within the Chamber of Commerce over that. And then subsequently, they decided they were going to be in favor, but they wanted to pave it and turn it into a commercial strip, the section from Mulberry to Huguenot Street, to make it into a, you know, commercial, you know, another commercial strip. And today, the pressure among, you know, people who do own property, their commercial property that is, also want to have access, even though maybe they're 50 feet away from a road, for example, wanting to turn it into a, like right now, I actually had a call from Dino Toscani, who owns the property at the base of, owns the building that In Good Taste is in.
Yeah.
And he wants to put in a 24-hour deli with access to the rail trail. Well, you can sort of see what's going to happen there. I mean, selling beer in a paper bag to people on the rail trail, you know, at night, and it suddenly becomes an enforcement problem for the police, and just sort of spilling over into any number of other events. So
Yeah,
it's
parks are meant to be closed at dusk, right?
well, can you define dusk?
Well, yes, there's several ways to define dusk, but there, you know,
It's not-
nautical
They're close to
dusk.
an hour and a half
Yeah.
difference.
It's not enforced, I can
Right.
assure you.
yeah.
Well, maybe let me just add to the idea of closing that at dusk and we have so many people that are regular runners in our community. You come home from work and, you know,
Right.
what happens in winter? You know, the trail's still
Yep.
open, and I know some of those runners, you know, Ian Earn.
Yep,
The guy who runs 52 miles in preparation for a 50-mile race.
that's, yeah,
I'm not kidding, he did.
yeah,
But that's somebody who's gonna come home from work, and when he goes out, there's still, you know, light out there, and coming back, there is a
yeah.
Marist College cross-country team practices here, as well as our college team. You know, these guys are running against dusk, and that's farm
Yeah.
usage, you know, drinking beer
That's
out of a
what
paper
it's for,
bag.
yeah. No, that's very problematic, and so is additional, you know, encroachments on the Walker Valley Road Trail. As we get more
Right.
buildings here, everyone's gonna wanna have their own access to the rail trail,
That's exactly it.
instead of using, you know,
The
the
street.
access points that are available on the cross streets, and that exacerbates a lot of problems. So we really do need to write that into the code.
Because you have a quiet residential zone along Huguenot Street, and then, you know, right on the other side of the rail trail, you could have Taco Bell
Right.
with
And
its.
the irony is people who live on Huguenot Street are not allowed to have access to it.
Right.
Okay, so, what's the feeling about this sort of northern, addendum?
I like the idea of not including it and returning it back to, what was it, B2? Right?
It was R2.
R2 rather.
Yeah, and I
Returning
think,
it back to R2. Like you said before, I'm hesitant for us to make any decisions without so many of our board members.
right,
present,
exactly.
but I do
So
feel okay.
have a think about that for next time.
I think it's fair to report the sense of the table, people who are here,
Yeah,
delete that
Absolutely.
northeastern aberration.
okay. What's your feeling? Should we continue or should we reconvene,
Reconvene.
next week? Yes, because we've, now
We'll
kind of,
just be
just be,
having this go
have
over.
Yeah,
have to
rather
go over
than-
this again.
Talk in circles.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Come up here, I have a question.
My question is quite simply, can you define sprawl? Because when Bill brought it up and talked about having a fourth floor to prevent sprawl, I'd like to know exactly what is being prevented. How do you define sprawl? I mean, I look at the community, a small section of Cherry Hill, which is a very nice little neighborhood. It has no sidewalks, by the way, and it was planned out many, many years ago, or developed many. Is that sprawl? Or is that just, a single-family dwellings within a semi, urban or semi-town environment?
Yeah, well, obviously defining sprawl is a very complicated and almost impossible thing. So we know that was a rhetorical question, but yeah,
So
sprawl.
mine was rhetorical?
Well,
or-
yeah.
Or asking about how do we
How do we define-
have a fourth floor to avoid the sprawl which we cannot define?
Well, exactly. So that those kinds of questions are ones that are really just to invoke discussion rather than provoke an answer. So, yeah,
give you my
sprawl
answer.
is very hard
I'll
to.
give you my answer later.
Okay, what's your answer, Dennis? What's
Well, I was just
sprawl?
going to say, Cherry Hill, the example that you brought up, is very unique portion of New Paltz because it's gridlocked. You can't use it to cut through from one portion of the community to the other. So the people that are going in there are the people that are living there, or
I mean, Cherry Hill.
in the Cherry Hill section, right?
Unless you're in the bike pedestrian community, and then that Cicero route to the ridge, which now George Seifert had done a wonderful thing. I mentioned to him there was, yes, he allowed a linkage there, but there was no signs, people didn't know to use it. Next day there was a sign up there, bike pedestrian usage. So there is a route right through there, and it's a wonderful little route.
Yeah, I'm thinking more cars,
Well, we're
You
not
know,
thinking about
but
this. Get rid of
and
it.
sprawl.
Well, the issue of the traffic circulation in New Paltz has been a real issue for many, many years. We brought this up 30 years ago, and we did our own traffic study when we were doing the master plan. And at that point, I said, we've met the traffic and they are us, like
Yeah.
Pogo says. Because, there's no other way around it. And Cherry Hill is landlocked. There were various proposals at various times to get, a cut-through street, and the Cherry Hill residents vociferously fought against it, so that, they would remain a kind of enclave there. And that's what's happened. We don't have any opportunities to avoid a lot of that Venturi Strip, it would be called. That is Main Street, where all of the traffic has to go, and there are very few
We sprawl, right up to the Wallkill, and just west of the Wallkill, it's pretty much all protected, which, it's almost like European communities are like that. The village ends, the fields start, and that's kind of the situation.
All these habitations, whether it's Nineveh or ancient Constantinople or the American Mound City in St. Louis, were all approximately a mile and a half in radius, or 3 miles across. So guess what? That's human walking speed. 1 hour from Right, something like Cherry Hill's not a problem, I don't think, You count cars can't go there, that's a good idea.
I have a friend who's writing a history of the trolley in the impulse.
Oh,
It ran every 6 minutes. Can you imagine?
Right.
I can actually remember my grandparents and my great aunt talking about riding the trolley, Gardner to New Paltz all the time.
Yeah.
Before Dennis leaves, I want to ask you and authorize you to cast my proxy vote next meeting for 1.5 parking spots.
Okay,
Or above.
Or more.
1.5 plus, all right?
1.49, no deal.
Okay, let's adjourn this
All right,
meeting.
motion-
We will
second.
reconvene next week on the 31st and have an extraordinary meeting so that we can consider the things that the consultant has put together for us to talk about.
You also might want to ask about more funding for the next village budget, since the budget year ends next meeting.
Okay,
Yeah, the new budget starts on the 1st of June.
okay.
So do we,
All right, thank you very much, and we're adjourning this meeting right now. Can you turn that off?
I got this one.
Did you get this one, Dennis? Okay. So